A picture-perfect family, a respected doctor, and a loving wife, until one morning, tragedy struck in their elegant Utah home. What appeared to be an accident soon unraveled into a shocking web of lies, betrayal, and murder. This is the chilling true story of Dr. Martin McNeil and his deadly secret. In the quiet community of Pleasant Grove, Utah, the McNeil family seemed to embody every ideal of success and devotion. Their large home sat against the backdrop of the Wasatch Mountains, a place where families were close-knit, faith was central, and reputation mattered. At the center of that admired household stood Dr. Martin McNeil and his wife, Michelle. To those who knew them, they were the definition of achievement. He a well-educated doctor and attorney, she a beautiful former beauty queen and devoted mother of 8. To their neighbors and church congregation, the McNeils appeared perfect. But beneath the charm and composure of this family was a growing sense of unease that few could have imagined would end in tragedy. Michelle Summers McNeil was known for her warmth, elegance, and selflessness. Her days were devoted to her children, and her faith shaped every part of her life. Those close to her said she had a quiet strength, a woman who held her family together through her husband's ambition and the pressures of their social standing. Martin, on the other hand, projected confidence and authority. Tall, handsome, and articulate, he carried an air of superiority that impressed many and intimidated others. Behind closed doors, his need for control extended far beyond his work and into every detail of family life. By early 2007, Michelle's marriage had begun to show cracks. She had noticed her husband becoming distant, secretive, and increasingly distracted. He was spending long hours away from home, his phone always out of reach. When she confronted him, he dismissed her worries as paranoia. Still, Michelle sensed something was deeply wrong. It was around this time that Martin began encouraging her to undergo cosmetic surgery. He told her she deserved it, that she should feel young and refreshed again. Michelle resisted, saying she didn't need it, but Martin insisted. Eventually, worn down by his pressure, she agreed to the procedure. In April of that year, Michelle underwent facial cosmetic surgery. Her daughters later recalled that she was nervous before the operation and uneasy about the strong medications her husband planned to give her afterward. Martin, being a physician, had personally managed her post-surgery care. He prescribed her a cocktail of painkillers and sedatives, stronger than what was typical for such a recovery. Michelle trusted him, even though something about the situation made her uneasy. In the days following the surgery, her daughters noticed their mother appeared weak and unusually drowsy. Alexis, the eldest, was in medical school and quickly became concerned. She had called home daily, checking on her mother's recovery. Michelle confided that she felt drugged and out of it, expressing her fear that her husband was giving her too much medication. Alexis urged her to take only what she needed and to keep a close watch on what her father provided. It was the last conversation they would have before everything changed. On the morning of April 11, 2007, a call came into 911 from the McNeil residence. Martin's voice was frantic, telling the operator that his wife was unresponsive in the bathtub. Paramedics rushed to the home, finding Michelle submerged, lifeless, and pale. Despite attempts to resuscitate her, she was pronounced dead at the scene. To outsiders, it was a tragic accident, an unexpected complication following surgery. But to her daughters, something about the story didn't fit. From the moment Michelle's body was taken from the home, Martin's behavior seemed strange. He appeared composed, even cold. While relatives and friends gathered in grief, he focused on paperwork, funeral arrangements, and logistics. During the funeral, those close to the family noticed how detached he seemed. There were no tears, no visible sorrow, just an air of control, as though he had already moved on. Days after Michelle's burial, the family received another shock. Martin introduced a new woman into the home, a young nurse named Gypsy Willis. He claimed she had been hired as a nanny to help care for the younger children. But Alexis and her siblings quickly realized that Gypsy was not there as an employee. She was their father's new companion. Her presence was immediate and invasive. She wore Michelle's clothes, slept in Michelle's bed, and even started managing household routines as if she had taken over her mother's place. The children were confused and uncomfortable, but Martin dismissed their concerns, insisting it was for the good of the family. Alexis couldn't ignore the red flags. Her father's affair with Gypsy had started long before her mother's death, and the timing of everything felt deliberate. Michelle had once suspected he was cheating, but she never knew with whom. Now the answer was living inside her home. The emotional atmosphere darkened. The younger children, still grieving, struggled to understand the rapid changes, while Alexis began collecting every detail she could about her mother's final days. As she reviewed her mother's medication bottles and prescriptions, Alexis was alarmed. The dosages were far higher than what should have been prescribed, even for someone recovering from surgery. She made notes, contacted friends in the medical field, and quietly raised her concerns with law enforcement. But the official cause of death, heart disease combined with drug effects, was accepted, and no deeper investigation followed. Still, the questions wouldn't go away. Why had Martin insisted on that specific combination of medications? Why had he been so calm, so quick to move on? And why was this new woman now embedded in their home, as if she had been waiting for Michelle's absence? The facade of the perfect family had shattered. Behind the walls of the McNeil household, grief had turned into suspicion, and suspicion into determination. Michelle's daughters, led by Alexis, began a long and exhausting pursuit of truth, one that would reveal a side of their father darker than they ever imagined. For now, Pleasant Grove returned to its quiet routines, unaware that a murder had been carefully hidden behind the illusion of an accident. The story that had begun with admiration and faith was transforming into one of deception, betrayal, and the relentless fight of a family seeking justice. And while the world saw a doctor mourning his wife, those who knew him best had started to see something else entirely. A man who had everything to gain from the woman's death and everything to lose if the truth came out. The weeks following Michelle's death carried an unsettling silence inside the McNeil home. Friends and neighbors tried to comfort the family, bringing food and prayers, but something about the atmosphere felt wrong. Michelle's daughters could sense it. The energy in the house had shifted. Martin moved quickly to erase traces of his late wife's presence. He redecorated rooms, gave away her belongings, and began introducing Gypsy Willis as someone the family needed. Her role as the new nanny soon blurred into something far more personal. She wasn't just assisting with the children. She was living like Michelle had never existed. To those on the outside, Martin was still the grieving husband. He spoke softly in church, thanked people for their condolences, and talked about his desire to move forward. But within his home, he appeared transformed, impatient, controlling, and distant. Gypsy's presence unsettled the children, especially Alexis and Rachel, who were old enough to understand what was happening. Michelle's memory was being erased piece by piece, replaced by a woman who seemed eager to take her place. Alexis, driven by instinct and the ache of loss, began digging deeper. She reviewed every document, every prescription her father had given their mother. Each label showed high doses of sedatives and painkillers: Valium, Ambien, Percocet, Lortab, strong enough to cause serious impairment. The combination didn't make medical sense. Michelle's surgery had been relatively simple, yet the medication list looked more like something prescribed for chronic pain or severe trauma. When Alexis questioned Martin, he dismissed her concerns, claiming he was a doctor and knew what he was doing. His tone was final, his authority unchallenged. But Alexis's unease only grew. She confided in her sisters, and together they began piecing together the puzzle of their mother's final days. Michelle had told several people she felt her husband was up to something, though she couldn't explain why. She had also mentioned finding suspicious phone calls and messages from another woman, messages she never got the chance to confront. Now, the woman from those calls was living under their roof. Months passed, and Martin's relationship with Gypsy became more public. He introduced her at church events, brought her to family gatherings, and even changed household records to list her as an employee. But Alexis noticed something strange. Gypsy wasn't just close to her father emotionally. She was also involved in his finances. Together, they opened bank accounts, altered insurance paperwork, and made unusual withdrawals. Slowly, Michelle's life insurance money and family savings began to shift under Gypsy's control. Meanwhile, the younger children, still grieving, began showing signs of emotional distress. They missed their mother and didn't understand why their father seemed so distant. Martin's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He monitored his daughter's calls, discouraged them from speaking about their mother, and insisted that everyone move on. When Alexis refused to stay silent, he accused her of being disobedient and sent her away, claiming she was too emotional. The tension between father and daughter became unbearable. But Alexis refused to give up. She contacted local authorities, sharing her suspicions about the cause of Michelle's death. The case, however, was difficult to reopen. Without solid evidence, law enforcement couldn't challenge the original ruling of accidental drowning. Still, Alexis's persistence caught the attention of a few investigators willing to listen. They began reviewing the case quietly, noting inconsistencies in the autopsy and Martin's statements. At the same time, Martin's own image was beginning to crack. Those who once admired him began hearing rumors. Stories of his affairs, of questionable medical practices, of a man who wasn't as honest as he appeared. Even in his professional life, Martin's credentials came under scrutiny. He had a history of embellishing his achievements, sometimes using fake names and falsified documents to elevate his reputation. These discoveries painted a very different picture of the man the community had once respected. Inside the home, Gypsy became bolder. She changed Michelle's personal passwords, took over the family computer, and started referring to the children as ours. For Alexis, this was unbearable. The memory of her mother was being overwritten by a stranger. She confronted her father once more, demanding to know the truth about Gypsy and her mother's death. Martin's reaction was explosive. He denied everything, accused her of betrayal, and claimed she was trying to destroy the family. But behind his anger, Alexis sensed fear, a rare break in his composure. Years went by with little progress. The case remained closed, and the family's relationships fractured. Yet Alexis and Rachel continued to push for answers, reaching out to prosecutors, medical examiners, and anyone who would listen. Their persistence finally paid off in 2010 when a new forensic review of Michelle's autopsy was ordered. The updated analysis revealed something crucial. Michelle's system contained a lethal mix of drugs, all prescribed by her husband. The manner of death was officially changed from natural to homicide. This revelation reignited the investigation. Detectives began reconstructing the events leading to Michelle's death, uncovering years of deceit. They found that Martin had begun an intense affair with Gypsy long before Michelle's surgery. He had also been researching sedatives and heart medications, drugs similar to those found in Michelle's system. The motive became clearer. With Michelle gone, Martin could pursue his relationship freely and maintain control over family finances. Investigators also discovered that Gypsy and Martin had engaged in a bizarre scheme involving identity theft. They had stolen the identity of one of the McNeil daughters to open credit accounts and move money. The case that began as a suspicious death had now expanded into a web of fraud, manipulation, and control. For Michelle's children, these findings were both vindicating and devastating. Their mother's death had not been an accident. It had been planned. The man they once called Dad had taken from them the person who meant the most. But this truth gave them new strength. They vowed to see justice served, even if it meant reliving the pain. As the legal process began, Martin's polished image of a respected doctor crumbled. He faced mounting evidence, media attention, and growing public scrutiny. The story of the McNeil family spread far beyond Pleasant Grove, capturing national headlines. A family that once stood as a symbol of success had become the center of one of Utah's most disturbing true crime cases. Still, as prosecutors prepared for trial, one question lingered in the air. Would the evidence be enough to convict a man who had spent his life manipulating everyone around him? The truth had finally emerged from the shadows, but the fight for justice was far from over. The courtroom in Provo, Utah, was filled to capacity when the trial of Dr. Martin McNeil began in 2013. Journalists lined the aisles, families clutched photos of Michelle, and the quiet hum of whispers filled the air. The man once admired for his intelligence and success now sat in a defendant's chair, wearing a plain suit and an emotionless expression. The charges were grave: murder and obstruction of justice, and the world was about to hear the full story of how a respected doctor had turned his medical knowledge into a weapon against his own wife. For Michelle's children, especially Alexis and Rachel, the trial was more than a legal battle. It was the end of a 6-year struggle for truth. They had carried their mother's memory through disbelief, isolation, and grief, often facing criticism for accusing their own father. But as they watched Martin sit under the harsh courtroom lights, they felt both the weight of pain and the relief of validation. The man who had once lectured them about honesty and faith was now being exposed for the lies that had shaped their lives. The prosecution began by laying out the timeline of events leading to Michelle's death. They painted a chilling picture. A man desperate to maintain control over his image, entangled in an affair, and willing to eliminate the one person standing in his way. Evidence showed that Martin had pressured Michelle into undergoing cosmetic surgery, knowing it would give him access to powerful sedatives and painkillers. He had personally overseen her recovery, administering high doses of drugs that left her weak and disoriented. Then, on April 11, 2007, when she was barely conscious, he left her in the bathtub where she drowned. Expert witnesses testified about the toxic levels of medication found in Michelle's body. The combination of Valium, Ambien, and other drugs would have been enough to cause severe sedation and respiratory distress. The prosecution argued that Martin, as a trained physician, knew exactly what he was doing. He had created the perfect cover story: his wife's surgery and the appearance of a natural death. It was a plan built on medical precision and emotional detachment. Then came the testimony of Gypsy Willis. Once the secret mistress and now a central figure in the investigation, Gypsy appeared nervous as she faced questions about her role in Martin's life. She admitted to having an affair with him while Michelle was alive but denied knowing anything about the murder. When prosecutors pressed her about their shared bank accounts, identity theft schemes, and the timing of her move into the McNeil home, she faltered. The jury could see that her relationship with Martin was built on deceit and manipulation. But the most powerful testimony came from Michelle's children. Alexis took the stand, her voice steady but filled with emotion. She spoke about her mother's final days, her fears, and the confusion over the medications Martin had prescribed. She recounted the day of the funeral, how her father showed no visible grief, how he introduced Gypsy into their home just days later, and how their lives had been turned upside down. Every word she spoke painted a vivid portrait of a woman who had been loved deeply and a family that had been betrayed completely. The defense, meanwhile, tried to argue that Michelle's death was a tragic accident. They claimed she had underlying health conditions, and that Martin's behavior after her death, though unusual, was not evidence of guilt. They portrayed him as a broken man coping poorly with loss. But as the evidence mounted, his forged documents, his lies about his education, his manipulation of finances, and his emotional coldness, the image of a grieving husband fell apart. During closing arguments, prosecutors reminded the jury that this case was not about speculation, but about motive, method, and opportunity. Martin McNeil had motive, his affair and financial ambitions. He had method, his medical expertise and access to drugs. And he had opportunity, the privacy of his own home and a trusting wife recovering from surgery. This was not a crime of passion, the prosecutor said. It was a crime of calculation. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict: guilty of murder and obstruction of justice. As the words were read aloud, the courtroom fell silent. Martin remained expressionless, staring ahead without reaction. For his daughters, it was both justice and heartbreak. They had proven the truth, but it came at a cost: a public acknowledgement that their father had killed their mother. The man who had once held their trust had destroyed it in the most devastating way possible. Martin was sentenced to life in prison. Behind bars, he continued to deny wrongdoing, insisting he was the victim of a family vendetta. But those who had followed the case knew better. The evidence was undeniable, and the pattern of deceit stretched far beyond Michelle's death. Investigators later uncovered that Martin had lied about parts of his medical education, falsified records, and manipulated those around him for decades. His charm had been a mask, a carefully constructed illusion that finally cracked. Gypsy Willis faced her own legal consequences. In 2014, she was convicted of identity theft and other fraud-related charges, but continued to deny any role in Michelle's death. She served her sentence quietly, later disappearing from public life. For the McNeil children, her presence remained a painful reminder of everything they had lost. In 2017, 4 years after his conviction, Martin McNeil was found dead in his prison cell. Authorities ruled it a suicide. The news brought a strange mix of emotions to those who had followed the case. Closure for some, sadness for others. For Michelle's children, it marked the final chapter of a nightmare that had lasted a decade. They expressed no anger, only relief that their mother's story would not be forgotten. Today, the story of Michelle and Martin McNeil is remembered as one of the most haunting domestic tragedies in modern Utah history. It is a story of how control, deception, and hidden desire can dismantle a family from within. It is also a story of resilience, the unbreakable strength of daughters who refused to be silenced, who fought for truth even when the world doubted them. In interviews years later, Alexis spoke of her mother's legacy. She wasn't just a victim, she said. She was a mother, a wife, a friend. She deserved to live, and we owed it to her to make sure people knew what really happened. That determination turned a suspicious death into a national case study of betrayal and justice. The once perfect image of the McNeil family had long faded, replaced by a reminder that appearances can hide dangerous truths. Behind the elegant home in Pleasant Grove, behind the smiling family portraits, lived a man whose brilliance was twisted by deceit, and a woman whose quiet strength continues to inspire those who believe in truth, no matter how long it takes to find it. And in the end, justice for Michelle McNeil was not just a legal victory. It was a testament to the power of love, perseverance, and the courage to confront darkness, even when that darkness wears the face of someone you once called family. In a quiet Colorado suburb, a respected dentist's perfect life hid a dark secret. Over weeks, subtle poisons turned his wife's daily routine into a nightmare, leading to a shocking betrayal. This is the chilling story of trust, deception, and murder that stunned a community and revealed how danger can hide in plain sight. Aurora, Colorado, a quiet suburb of Denver, had long been known for its family neighborhoods, tree-lined streets, and the sense of safety that comes from a tight-knit community. Among the residents was James Craig, a well-established dentist, respected in his profession, and married to Angela Craig, a devoted mother and office manager at her husband's dental practice. Their life, on the surface, appeared stable and routine. They had been married for over 2 decades and shared 6 children. To outsiders, the Craig family represented a picture of suburban success, comfortable, respected, and seemingly harmonious. But beneath this facade, tensions and secrets were quietly building, setting the stage for a series of events that would shock the community and ultimately lead to a devastating tragedy. Angela Craig, at 43, had been described by friends and family as compassionate, diligent, and deeply invested in the well-being of her family. She balanced her role as a mother of 6 with responsibilities at the dental practice, where she handled much of the administrative work. She was meticulous about her health, maintaining an active lifestyle that included regular exercise and a disciplined nutrition routine. Part of this routine involved protein shakes and pre-workout supplements, a detail that would later become central to the investigation into her untimely death. Despite her busy schedule, Angela prioritized family dinners, school events, and supporting her children in their activities, creating a sense of warmth and stability in the household. James Craig, then aged around 45 to 47, had cultivated a reputation as a competent and personable dentist. His practice was successful and he was respected professionally. Yet, as investigators later revealed, behind closed doors, James faced mounting pressures. Financial difficulties had begun to accumulate, with his personal and professional expenses creating tension that he struggled to manage. Reports indicated that he was concerned about the potential fallout of a divorce, both financially and socially, given the standing he held in the community. Adding to this strain, James was reportedly involved in an extramarital affair with another dentist. The combination of financial stress, marital strain, and personal desires would, according to prosecutors, form the motive for the crime that would unfold. In early March 2023, Angela began experiencing unusual health issues that prompted several hospital visits. On March 6th, she was admitted to the hospital with symptoms including dizziness, vomiting, fainting, and confusion. Initially, medical staff considered common causes, such as viral infections or metabolic disturbances. However, her symptoms persisted and escalated, leading to 2 more hospital admissions within the same month. Each visit raised more questions than answers, and the situation began to worry both her family and her doctors. Her condition appeared to fluctuate inexplicably, creating concern about underlying medical issues that were not immediately apparent. Investigators later discovered that the cause of Angela's illness was not natural. Prosecutors presented evidence indicating that James had laced Angela's pre-workout protein shakes with arsenic and other toxic substances over a period of time. This gradual poisoning was intended to create symptoms that could be mistaken for natural illness, delaying suspicion and masking the true cause of her deteriorating health. The use of commonly consumed health supplements as the vehicle for poison reflected a calculated approach, one that required planning and knowledge of chemistry to achieve the intended effect without immediate detection. Evidence presented during the investigation highlighted James Craig's online activities in the weeks leading up to Angela's hospitalizations. Searches conducted from his dental office computer included phrases such as, "How to make murder look like a heart attack," and "Is arsenic detectable in an autopsy?" These queries, as prosecutors argued, demonstrated premeditation and an awareness of the need to obscure the cause of death. The online search history became a significant piece of the case, illustrating both intent and forethought. Investigators also noted that he had acquired potassium cyanide, a highly lethal substance, through channels linked to his professional practice, further emphasizing the premeditated nature of the crime. Throughout the initial stages of Angela's hospital visits, James presented himself as a concerned husband. He communicated with medical staff, managed visitors, and appeared to advocate for his wife's care. In reality, prosecutors contended, he was preparing to deliver a final, fatal dose of poison. Surveillance footage and witness accounts later indicated that James accessed the hospital room with a syringe, administering a combination of cyanide and tetrahydrozoline, an ingredient commonly found in over-the-counter eye drops. This combination proved lethal, and Angela ultimately suffered brain death. She was removed from life support after all medical interventions were exhausted. The timeline of events in March 2023 painted a disturbing picture of careful orchestration. Over a 10-day span, Angela's health declined dramatically, with each hospital visit adding to the appearance of an unexplained medical crisis. James's interactions with medical staff, his preparation of meals and supplements, and his online research suggested a methodical approach to eliminating suspicion. While Angela's condition initially perplexed doctors, toxicology reports eventually revealed elevated levels of arsenic, cyanide, and tetrahydrozoline, confirming that her illness was artificially induced. The discovery of these substances turned what appeared to be a series of unexplained medical episodes into a clear case of deliberate poisoning. Friends, family, and neighbors struggled to reconcile the public image of James and Angela Craig with the emerging facts of the investigation. To many, the idea that a respected dentist could plan and execute such a crime against his spouse was inconceivable. Community members expressed shock and disbelief, noting that the couple had always seemed committed to their children and the practice they shared. The contrast between the family's outwardly successful life and the hidden tensions behind closed doors highlighted the complexity of the case and the difficulty in predicting human behavior based on appearances alone. As investigators pieced together evidence, the case began to take shape. Hospital staff were questioned extensively, reviewing interactions with James and noting any unusual behaviors. Digital forensic experts analyzed his search history and online communications, tracing the acquisition of toxic substances and confirming premeditation. Interviews with family members and colleagues provided further context about James's motivations, including financial pressures and the extramarital affair. The cumulative effect of this evidence painted a portrait of a carefully planned crime, executed with precision and intent, culminating in the tragic death of Angela Craig. By the end of Part 1, the stage was set for the legal proceedings that would follow. Angela's sudden decline and eventual death had left a family in shock, a community in mourning, and investigators with a growing body of evidence pointing toward deliberate harm. The meticulous preparation, combined with the seemingly incongruous public persona of James Craig, would become central themes in the trial. The contrast between appearance and reality, and the tragic consequences of hidden motives, underscored the chilling narrative of this case. The story of Angela's poisoning was only beginning to unfold, and the coming months would reveal the full scope of deception, calculation, and betrayal that had shattered a family and captured public attention. The investigation into Angela Craig's death unfolded slowly at first, as medical staff tried to understand the cause of her sudden and repeated hospitalizations. Initially, doctors considered common medical explanations for her symptoms: viral infections, metabolic imbalances, or cardiovascular issues. Each hospital visit offered no definitive diagnosis, leaving Angela's family concerned and baffled. By the third admission in March 2023, medical professionals began to notice a pattern that could not be easily explained. The combination of dizziness, vomiting, fainting, and confusion, along with inconsistent test results, hinted at the possibility of an external factor contributing to her decline. It was this uncertainty that drew the attention of investigators and forensic experts. Hospital staff reported that James Craig remained unusually attentive, often staying close to Angela's bedside, monitoring her treatment, and managing communication with the medical team. While this behavior initially appeared supportive, investigators would later examine his presence as part of a larger pattern of involvement that coincided with her worsening condition. Security footage captured moments in which James accessed Angela's room alone, and later testimony would suggest that these visits may have involved administering a lethal substance. While his public persona remained that of a caring husband, the investigation revealed actions inconsistent with genuine concern, underscoring a calculated approach to the unfolding tragedy. The turning point in the investigation came when toxicology reports revealed elevated levels of arsenic, cyanide, and tetrahydrozoline, a common ingredient in over-the-counter eye drops, in Angela's system. These findings indicated that her illness had been deliberately induced. Investigators immediately expanded their focus to James Craig, examining his activities, communications, and access to chemicals that could have been used to poison his wife. It became clear that the pattern of hospitalization, combined with his unique access to toxic substances, aligned with the timeline of Angela's decline. Forensic analysis also confirmed that the levels of these substances were sufficient to produce her observed symptoms and ultimately cause brain death. Digital forensic experts examined James Craig's online behavior, uncovering search queries that suggested premeditation. Phrases such as, "How to make murder look like a heart attack," and "Is arsenic detectable in an autopsy?" were found on computers associated with his dental practice. Additionally, records indicated that he had acquired potassium cyanide through professional channels, further reinforcing the theory that the poisoning was intentional. Investigators considered these findings in conjunction with his access to Angela's supplements and hospital visits, constructing a timeline that strongly suggested deliberate planning and execution. Family and colleagues provided crucial context for understanding James Craig's potential motivations. Friends noted growing marital strain and described James as increasingly anxious about financial pressures. Reports suggested he feared the consequences of divorce, including potential loss of income, reputation, and stability for himself and his children. In parallel, investigators learned of an extramarital affair between James and another dentist. The affair, combined with the looming financial difficulties, presented a possible motive for eliminating Angela while maintaining control over financial and personal outcomes. This combination of personal desires and practical considerations provided the prosecution with a compelling framework for establishing intent. As the investigation progressed, law enforcement carefully reviewed hospital protocols and interactions between James and medical staff. Witness testimony revealed that he was present during moments when Angela's condition worsened, sometimes coinciding with the administration of treatments or supplements. Hospital personnel recalled that James appeared particularly vigilant about the contents of Angela's meals and drinks, which investigators later linked to the delivery of arsenic and other substances through her protein shakes. While subtle, these actions contributed to a growing body of evidence indicating deliberate interference with her health. During interviews, James Craig maintained a calm demeanor, presenting himself as cooperative and deeply concerned for his wife. This approach initially complicated the investigation, as there were no overt signs of aggression or coercion. However, the accumulation of circumstantial evidence, including digital searches, acquisition of toxic chemicals, and hospital activity, created a clear pattern of calculated behavior. Investigators emphasized the methodical nature of the poisoning, highlighting that it was not a sudden or impulsive act but a series of deliberate decisions designed to achieve a lethal outcome while minimizing immediate detection. Further forensic analysis focused on the pre-workout protein shakes Angela routinely consumed. Samples of the supplements revealed traces of arsenic, consistent with the toxicology reports from her hospitalizations. Investigators concluded that the poisoning had been administered gradually, producing symptoms that mimicked natural illness and delaying the identification of a deliberate act. The use of a common health product as a vehicle for poison illustrated a sophisticated understanding of chemistry and human physiology, allowing James Craig to exploit the trust Angela placed in him as both her husband and caregiver. Community response to the investigation was a mixture of shock and disbelief. Neighbors and friends struggled to reconcile the image of James Craig, a respected dentist and father, with the possibility that he could have orchestrated his wife's death. The revelations of premeditated poisoning challenged the perception of the family as typical and harmonious. Interviews with acquaintances revealed that many had been unaware of the marital strain, financial pressures, or personal entanglements that may have contributed to the crime. The contrast between public perception and private reality became a central theme in discussions of the case, highlighting the complexity of human behavior and the hidden dimensions of domestic life. Investigators also considered the potential role of James's professional network. Colleagues and staff at the dental practice were questioned regarding his behavior, purchases, and any unusual requests. Some recalled his interest in chemistry beyond standard dental applications, while others noted unusual inquiries about chemical compounds and their effects. Combined with hospital and forensic evidence, these accounts reinforced the conclusion that James had the knowledge, access, and intent to carry out the poisoning in a controlled and deliberate manner. As the investigation moved toward formal charges, prosecutors compiled a comprehensive case detailing the timeline of Angela's decline, the methodical administration of poison, and James Craig's actions leading up to her death. The evidence presented included hospital records, toxicology reports, digital search histories, chemical acquisition logs, and witness testimonies. The narrative constructed by law enforcement and prosecution portrayed a chilling example of deception and calculation, illustrating how a seemingly ordinary family life could conceal a carefully orchestrated crime. By the end of this phase of the investigation, James Craig was formally charged with first-degree murder, along with multiple associated counts, including tampering with evidence and solicitation to commit perjury. The charges reflected the deliberate and premeditated nature of his actions, supported by a combination of forensic, digital, and testimonial evidence. Angela Craig's death, initially appearing as a series of mysterious hospitalizations, had been reframed as a tragic outcome of calculated planning. The evidence laid the groundwork for the trial, which would examine not only the actions of James Craig, but also the broader implications of trust, betrayal, and the consequences of hidden motives within a family. Part 2 concludes with the case firmly in the hands of the legal system, the evidence pointing toward deliberate poisoning, and the stage set for courtroom proceedings. The investigation had meticulously uncovered the details of the crime, highlighting the intersection of personal desires, financial pressures, and professional knowledge in the orchestration of a domestic tragedy. With the formal charges in place, the next chapter would focus on the trial itself, the presentation of evidence, and the eventual judgment that would bring closure to a case that had captivated both the local community and the broader public. The trial of James Craig began in the summer of 2025, drawing attention from the local community and national media alike. Prosecutors presented a meticulously constructed case, detailing the sequence of events that led to Angela Craig's death. Central to their argument was the evidence of premeditation. Digital searches from James's dental office computer, his acquisition of toxic chemicals, and the administration of arsenic and cyanide over time. Each piece of evidence was woven together to demonstrate a pattern of deliberate behavior, illustrating that Angela's death was not accidental or the result of natural illness, but a calculated act executed with precision. During the proceedings, prosecutors outlined the couple's personal circumstances, highlighting marital strain, financial pressure, and James's extramarital relationship. The prosecution argued that these factors created a motive. James allegedly sought to eliminate Angela to pursue a new relationship while maintaining control over his finances and life insurance. Courtroom testimony emphasized the contrast between James's outward persona as a caring husband and the private actions he took that ultimately led to his wife's death. Experts in toxicology and forensic medicine explained how the substances found in Angela's system, arsenic, cyanide, and tetrahydrozoline, were sufficient to produce the symptoms observed during her hospitalizations and ultimately cause brain death. The timeline presented in court was detailed and precise. Witnesses, including hospital staff, recounted the series of events in early March 2023, noting the repeated hospital admissions and James's consistent presence during critical moments. Security footage and testimonies revealed that he had accessed Angela's hospital room alone at times, coinciding with moments when her condition worsened. Experts explained how the combination of arsenic and cyanide could be administered subtly through protein shakes or supplements, producing symptoms that appeared consistent with other medical conditions. This evidence reinforced the prosecution's assertion of intentional poisoning, demonstrating a methodical and deliberate pattern of behavior. Digital evidence played a crucial role in the trial. Records of James's internet searches were presented to the jury, showing queries about making a murder appear as a heart attack and detecting arsenic in autopsies. These searches were coupled with purchase records of potassium cyanide and other chemicals, linking him directly to the means of committing the crime. Prosecutors argued that this combination of motive, opportunity, and action left little doubt that James Craig had orchestrated the events leading to Angela's death. The jury was asked to consider not only the physical evidence but also the behavioral and digital footprint that traced his intent over weeks leading up to the final act. Family testimony was another pivotal aspect of the trial. Angela and James's 6 children were deeply affected by the proceedings, with several providing statements about the impact of their mother's death and their father's actions. Their testimonies conveyed the human cost of the crime, highlighting the emotional and psychological toll on the family. They described their mother as a loving, dedicated figure whose life had been cut tragically short and expressed disbelief and sorrow over their father's betrayal. This emotional component provided a powerful counterpoint to the technical forensic evidence, reminding the jury of the profound consequences of the crime on real lives. Throughout the trial, the defense maintained that James Craig did not intentionally harm his wife. They suggested that Angela may have suffered from underlying medical conditions and that any actions taken by James were consistent with a concerned spouse. The defense questioned the interpretation of digital evidence and toxicology results, asserting that they did not conclusively prove direct administration of poison by James. However, the prosecution countered with a detailed presentation of circumstantial and direct evidence, emphasizing the consistency of the timeline, the deliberate nature of chemical acquisition, and the pattern of behavior observed in both the hospital and the home. Expert witnesses for the prosecution explained the science behind the toxins used. They outlined how arsenic and cyanide could produce symptoms resembling common medical conditions, thereby delaying detection. They also noted the use of tetrahydrozoline, an ingredient in eye drops, which added to the complexity of the poisoning and underscored the calculated nature of the act. By demonstrating the toxicological evidence in conjunction with the behavioral evidence, prosecutors painted a comprehensive picture of intentional harm, illustrating both the planning and execution required to carry out the crime over a sustained period. The courtroom proceedings were methodical, with careful presentation of each piece of evidence. Photographs of medical charts, records of hospital admissions, and expert analyses were reviewed in detail. Testimony highlighted the meticulous steps taken by James Craig, from researching methods to acquiring chemicals and administering poison through everyday items. The prosecution emphasized that the sequence of events was too consistent and deliberate to be coincidental, and that James's actions were driven by calculated intent rather than chance or misfortune. After several weeks of testimony, the trial concluded with closing arguments that reinforced the central narrative of premeditation and motive. The prosecution urged the jury to consider the totality of the evidence, emphasizing the digital searches, acquisition of chemicals, hospital visits, and family testimony as a comprehensive demonstration of intentional action. The defense reiterated the possibility of alternative explanations for Angela's illness but struggled to counter the weight of the combined evidence presented by the prosecution. Ultimately, the jury reached a verdict in July 2025. James Craig was found guilty of first-degree murder, along with multiple associated counts, including tampering with evidence and solicitation to commit perjury. The conviction reflected the jury's assessment of the evidence, affirming that Angela's death had been intentionally caused by her husband and that his actions were premeditated and deliberate. The verdict was met with a mixture of relief and sorrow by family members and the community, recognizing justice while grappling with the profound tragedy that had unfolded. Sentencing followed shortly after the verdict. Judge Shea Whitaker imposed a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, the mandatory sentence for first-degree murder in Colorado. In court, family members of Angela Craig expressed their grief and the impact of the crime on their lives. Her children spoke about the loss of their mother, the betrayal by their father, and the need to find a path forward despite the trauma they had endured. The sentence underscored the severity of the crime and the consequences of deliberate actions that take the life of another. The aftermath of the trial left lasting effects on the Craig family and the wider community. Friends and neighbors reflected on the stark contrast between the public image of the Craig household and the private realities that had led to the tragedy. The case served as a cautionary example of how appearances can mask hidden motives and complex personal struggles. In addition, the trial highlighted the role of careful investigation, forensic science, and courtroom procedure in uncovering the truth and ensuring accountability. For James Craig, the conviction marked the end of his professional career, personal freedom, and public reputation. He became a figure defined by the crime he committed rather than the career and family life he once led. Meanwhile, Angela Craig's legacy lived on through her children, who would carry the memory of their mother and the lessons of resilience, trust, and vigilance shaped by her loss. The case resonated beyond the immediate community, drawing attention from national media outlets and serving as a reminder of the complexity of domestic crimes and the critical importance of thorough investigation. In the end, the story of James and Angela Craig remains a chilling example of the consequences of secrecy, betrayal, and calculated harm within a family. It demonstrates the power of forensic evidence, investigative diligence, and the justice system in bringing closure to a tragedy. While Angela's life was cut short, the meticulous work of investigators, prosecutors, and the legal system ensured that the truth was revealed and that accountability was enforced. The Craig case continues to be referenced in discussions about domestic crime, premeditated poisoning, and the intersection of personal motives with professional knowledge, illustrating both the fragility of trust and the enduring pursuit of justice. In a quiet New York suburb, a respected doctor's perfect life hides a dark secret. When his estranged wife is found dead, shocking revelations of anger, betrayal, and a bitter divorce emerge. Discover the full story of the Newlander case, a chilling tale of trust shattered and justice pursued. In the quiet suburban enclave of DeWitt, New York, just outside the bustling city of Syracuse, the Newlander family once represented the ideal image of success and stability. Dr. Robert Newlander, a respected obstetrician-gynecologist, and his wife, Leslie, had built a life that many admired. Their elegant mansion stood as a symbol of both professional accomplishment and family life, hosting gatherings and celebrations over the years. Robert's reputation in the medical community was formidable. Patients trusted him, colleagues praised his skill, and his career appeared unshakable. But behind the polished exterior, cracks in the family's foundation were growing, hidden from public view yet increasingly apparent to those closest to the Newlanders. Marital strain had been mounting for years. Robert and Leslie's relationship, once rooted in mutual respect, had begun to deteriorate under the pressures of daily life, differing expectations, and the weight of financial responsibilities. Friends and family described Robert as meticulous, ambitious, and at times controlling. Leslie, on the other hand, had begun asserting her independence more firmly as the marriage faltered. She sought her own voice within the household, navigating a complex mix of emotional stress and the ever-present tension of living under the same roof as a spouse she no longer trusted. The Newlander home, though outwardly serene, had become a stage for unspoken conflict, subtle threats, and an undercurrent of fear that no one outside could see. By 2012, the couple had officially begun divorce proceedings. Legal documents, custody concerns, and financial negotiations filled their days. The children of the Newlanders, though shielded from the most acrimonious details, were aware of the growing rift. Their presence added weight to the unfolding drama. Every argument, every disagreement, had implications that extended beyond Robert and Leslie themselves. The courtroom would later highlight how custody battles often intensify domestic tension, with children inadvertently becoming symbolic stakes in a larger conflict. In the Newlander household, even simple interactions carried an emotional charge, as both parents navigated their separate paths under one roof. Observers noted that Robert's behavior had become increasingly erratic in private. While he maintained a professional and calm exterior at the hospital, at home he was reportedly tense and impatient. He had become preoccupied with financial matters, the divorce settlement, and the legal implications of custody. Leslie, meanwhile, had begun to make plans for her life outside the marriage. Friends described her as resilient, determined to maintain normalcy for her children, and increasingly aware of the potential danger posed by unresolved conflicts with Robert. Despite these warning signs, neither party could entirely escape the daily friction that living together created. On the morning of September 20, 2012, the Newlander mansion seemed like any other suburban home. Quiet, orderly, and filled with the routines of family life. Yet by the end of the day, the scene would transform into one of tragedy, marking a turning point that would shock both the local community and a nation following the story. Leslie was found dead in the home, her life taken in a manner that initially left investigators struggling to piece together the sequence of events. Though the exact details of the crime were handled carefully in public reports to avoid sensationalism, authorities quickly noted that the circumstances pointed toward an act of violence carried out by someone familiar with the household. The intimate knowledge of the home and its occupants suggested a domestic origin, shifting investigative focus to those closest to Leslie. Law enforcement approached the case methodically, recognizing the complexity of investigating a crime within a family residence. Officers and detectives canvassed the mansion, taking care to preserve evidence while attempting to understand the events that led to Leslie's death. Forensic analysis, including careful documentation of the scene, played a critical role in reconstructing what had occurred. Each room, each detail, and each discrepancy told part of the story, allowing investigators to begin assembling a narrative grounded in fact rather than speculation. Neighbors and friends were interviewed, shedding light on the couple's interactions and providing insight into the family dynamic. As investigators delved deeper, Robert Newlander emerged as a person of interest. While he had outwardly maintained a composed demeanor, inconsistencies in his statements and behavior raised questions. Prosecutors would later argue that Robert's frustration over the divorce and custody disputes had reached a breaking point, leading to a premeditated act. The contrast between his public persona as a dedicated physician and the private tensions of his household became a central theme in the legal narrative. Evidence suggested that attempts had been made to manipulate the scene, indicating consciousness of guilt and an effort to obscure the truth. In the days following the discovery, the local community struggled to reconcile the shocking events with their perception of the Newlanders. Friends described Leslie as compassionate and devoted, both as a mother and as a professional. Robert's colleagues expressed disbelief, noting his reputation for competence and professionalism. The media coverage, handled with care to respect both the family and ongoing investigations, highlighted the extraordinary nature of a domestic tragedy unfolding among well-known and respected individuals. The story became a cautionary tale, a reminder that appearances could mask profound personal conflict, and that even seemingly stable households could harbor danger. By the conclusion of Part 1, the foundation for a gripping legal drama had been set. Investigators had collected critical evidence, established timelines, and begun interviews that would later form the backbone of the trial. Robert Newlander's role in the tragedy was not yet fully determined in public awareness, leaving a mixture of speculation, fear, and curiosity in the community. The Newlander case was no longer just a story about a family. It had become a complex examination of human behavior, domestic tension, and the consequences of actions taken in moments of intense emotional strain. The investigation into Leslie Newlander's death quickly evolved into one of the most high-profile cases in the Syracuse area, capturing the attention of local residents and national media alike. Authorities approached the Newlander mansion with caution, fully aware that the scene they had entered was both a family home and a potential crime scene. Detectives meticulously documented every detail, photographing rooms, cataloging items, and tracing potential evidence that could shed light on the events of September 20th, 2012. Each step of the investigation had to balance thoroughness with sensitivity, given the presence of the couple's children and the complex family dynamics at play. Initial findings pointed to troubling inconsistencies in the accounts provided by those closest to Leslie. Robert Newlander, despite his outward calm, gave statements that investigators found difficult to reconcile with the physical evidence in the home. Though he cooperated with authorities to a degree, his explanations were often vague, raising questions about his possible involvement. For law enforcement, the challenge was to separate perception from fact, to examine the details of the crime scene objectively without bias, and to reconstruct a timeline that could withstand scrutiny in a court of law. Each observation, from the arrangement of household objects to subtle signs of disturbance, became a piece of the puzzle. Forensic experts played a critical role in this process. The science of reconstructing events within a home requires careful attention to detail, and in the Newlander case, it provided investigators with crucial insights. Every mark, every irregularity in the home environment was considered in the context of both the murder and potential attempts to conceal it. The pattern of evidence suggested deliberate manipulation, a fact that would later become a cornerstone of the prosecution's argument. Through careful analysis, experts were able to establish sequences of activity, identify inconsistencies in accounts, and determine that the perpetrator likely had intimate knowledge of the residence and its routines. The children, though not direct participants in the crime, became an essential element in understanding the household's atmosphere. Their presence underscored the emotional weight of the family conflict and the stakes involved in the ongoing custody dispute. Interviews with those close to the family revealed that the children had witnessed tension, arguments, and emotional strain on a near-daily basis. This context helped investigators and later the jury to comprehend not only motive but the psychological environment that may have contributed to escalating conflict. It also highlighted the broader human cost of domestic disputes, how they can extend far beyond the adults directly involved. Community reaction to the investigation was immediate and intense. Neighbors, many of whom had known the Newlanders for years, struggled to reconcile the public image of the family with the shocking events unfolding behind closed doors. Social networks, both formal and informal, became conduits for speculation, rumors, and expressions of grief. Local media covered the story with careful attention, mindful of the sensitivity required when reporting on a case involving children and ongoing legal proceedings. Even as coverage increased, authorities reminded the public that facts, not conjecture, would guide the judicial process. As evidence mounted, investigators increasingly focused on Robert Newlander. Analysis suggested that he had not only been present at the time of the crime but had attempted to manipulate the scene afterward. Staging, cleaning, and other subtle alterations indicated a conscious effort to mislead authorities and obscure the truth. Prosecutors would later frame these actions as indicative of intent and awareness, key elements in establishing culpability. This evidence, combined with testimony from those who knew the couple intimately, created a narrative that the tension between Robert and Leslie had reached a tragic climax. The lead-up to the trial was marked by intense preparation from both sides. Prosecutors meticulously organized the evidence, emphasizing the premeditated nature of the act and the deliberate attempts to cover it up. They highlighted Robert's behavioral patterns, his control over household routines, and the escalating conflict surrounding the divorce and custody disputes. The defense, in contrast, sought to portray Robert as a man caught in extraordinary emotional stress, whose actions were impulsive rather than planned. This contrast between motive and intent became a central theme, not only in courtroom arguments but in public understanding of the case. Courtroom preparation involved extensive consultation with forensic experts, psychologists, and legal analysts. Each piece of evidence collected from the Newlander home had to be clearly contextualized, ensuring it could withstand cross-examination. Witnesses were carefully coached to present factual testimony without emotional exaggeration, and investigators reviewed their findings to confirm accuracy and consistency. The trial was anticipated to be both lengthy and complex, reflecting the intricacies of domestic homicide cases, the sophistication of forensic reconstruction, and the high stakes of a crime that had captured national attention. During pretrial hearings, questions of credibility, intent, and the interpretation of evidence dominated proceedings. Defense attorneys challenged the prosecution's assertions, emphasizing ambiguities in the forensic record and attempting to cast doubt on whether Robert had acted with premeditation. Prosecutors countered by presenting a detailed account of behavioral patterns, interactions, and forensic findings, arguing that the evidence painted a coherent picture of deliberate action and post-crime manipulation. The courtroom became a space where science, law, and human psychology intersected, as both sides sought to frame the narrative in a way that would resonate with the jury. Throughout the investigation and pretrial period, the community remained engaged but anxious. The Newlander children's welfare, the public image of the family, and the broader implications of domestic violence within affluent households were topics of ongoing discussion. Experts consulted by media outlets emphasized the importance of careful reporting, noting that the case illustrated broader societal issues, how conflict, stress, and emotional pressure can escalate when left unaddressed, even among those who appear successful and respected. The Newlander case became more than a local story. It was a reflection of universal themes of human behavior, family dynamics, and accountability. By the time the trial commenced, investigators had compiled a comprehensive record of the events leading to Leslie Newlander's death. The crime scene reconstruction, forensic evidence, witness testimony, and behavioral analysis all converged to form a detailed narrative. Prosecutors were prepared to argue that the combination of domestic tension, financial disputes, and emotional stress had culminated in a deliberate act, followed by efforts to conceal the truth. Defense attorneys remained committed to challenging this interpretation, emphasizing uncertainty and human fallibility. The stage was set for a courtroom confrontation that would ultimately determine both guilt and the broader message conveyed by this tragic story. The trial of Dr. Robert Newlander drew widespread attention, both locally and nationally, as the details of Leslie Newlander's death were presented in court. For many, the courtroom became a stage not only for legal arguments but for a deeper exploration of human behavior, domestic conflict, and the consequences of unresolved tension within a family. Prosecutors and defense attorneys alike understood the high stakes. The case was a complex interplay of forensic science, witness testimony, and psychological insight, all unfolding before a jury tasked with interpreting fact, motive, and intent. From the outset, the prosecution's narrative focused on the tensions that had escalated within the Newlander household. They presented evidence suggesting that Robert, a man accustomed to control and precision, had become overwhelmed by the pressures of a contentious divorce, financial disputes, and custody negotiations. Prosecutors emphasized behavioral patterns, highlighting episodes of controlling and impatient conduct, interactions that demonstrated escalating frustration, and moments where Robert's temperament had reportedly become volatile. Combined with the forensic evidence collected from the mansion, the prosecution framed a picture of a calculated act, followed by deliberate attempts to obscure the truth. Forensic experts played a pivotal role in the courtroom. Detailed reconstructions of the Newlander home, photographs of the crime scene, and analysis of physical evidence were presented to illustrate how events unfolded. These experts described patterns of disturbance, inconsistencies in the environment, and subtle signs of staging. Each element was meticulously explained, ensuring the jury understood not only what had occurred, but also why investigators believed the evidence pointed to Robert's direct involvement. This scientific framework became a cornerstone of the prosecution's case, transforming what might have been abstract accusations into concrete, observable findings. Witness testimony further reinforced the prosecution's arguments. Friends, family members, and neighbors spoke about the dynamics of the Newlander household, painting a picture of tension, disagreement, and emotional strain. These accounts, while sensitive to the presence of children and the need for discretion, provided insight into the environment in which Leslie lived. Experts consulted by the prosecution also addressed psychological aspects, suggesting how repeated stress, perceived threats to control, and unresolved conflicts could contribute to escalations in behavior. The combination of personal observations and professional analysis created a compelling, multidimensional narrative for the jury to consider. The defense, meanwhile, sought to challenge the notion of premeditation. Attorneys portrayed Robert as a man under extraordinary emotional stress, suggesting that the tragic events were impulsive rather than calculated. They emphasized ambiguities in the forensic record, highlighting areas where evidence could be interpreted in multiple ways. Defense witnesses discussed Robert's professional reputation, the pressures of his medical career, and the emotional toll of the divorce. By presenting an alternative perspective, the defense aimed to introduce doubt, encouraging the jury to consider that a complex mix of circumstance, stress, and human fallibility, not deliberate intent, might explain the outcome. Throughout the proceedings, the jury was asked to weigh both tangible evidence and nuanced human behavior. The trial became a careful balancing act, determining what was scientifically verifiable, what could be reasonably inferred, and how motive and intent intersected with observable actions. Courtroom observers noted the meticulous care with which both sides presented their cases, reflecting the gravity of the charges and the societal importance of reaching a fair, evidence-based verdict. Media coverage, while attentive, remained measured, respecting the legal process and the need to protect the privacy of the children involved. After weeks of testimony, cross-examination, and legal argumentation, deliberations began. Jurors examined the timeline of events, the forensic reconstructions, and the psychological evidence, weighing the prosecution's claims against the defense's challenges. Central to their deliberation was the question of intent. Had Robert Newlander acted with premeditation, or was this a tragic, impulsive act stemming from domestic tension? The jury's task was not to assess personal character alone, but to determine whether the legal threshold for second-degree murder had been met based on the evidence presented. Ultimately, the jury returned with a verdict that reflected the prosecution's careful framing of the case. Robert Newlander was found guilty of second-degree murder, a determination that underscored the court's assessment that the act had been deliberate, even if not pre-planned in the most formal sense. Additionally, he was convicted of tampering with evidence, confirming that efforts to manipulate the crime scene had been both recognized and significant. The sentencing reflected the seriousness of the offenses, ensuring a lengthy prison term that emphasized accountability and the societal consequences of such actions. For the community, the verdict brought a measure of closure, while also serving as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences that domestic discord and unresolved conflict can have. The aftermath of the trial left a profound imprint on all those connected to the case. For the Newlander children, life was irrevocably altered, and support systems were established to help them navigate the emotional and practical challenges that followed. Friends, neighbors, and colleagues grappled with the duality of Robert's public image and the private reality revealed in court. The case also prompted broader discussions about the signs of escalating domestic tension, the role of mediation in contentious divorces, and the importance of professional and personal accountability. Experts in family law and psychology highlighted how the combination of stress, financial disputes, and custody concerns can create environments where conflicts spiral into tragedy, emphasizing the need for early intervention and support. Beyond the legal and emotional implications, the Newlander case has remained a reference point in discussions of domestic homicide within professional households. Analysts and educators use the story to examine how appearances can mask internal strife, how emotional control can deteriorate under stress, and how attempts to conceal wrongdoing can compound consequences. The case demonstrates the interplay between human psychology, domestic life, and the justice system, offering lessons for both legal professionals and the public at large. Years after the trial, the story of Leslie Newlander's death continues to resonate, not as a sensationalized headline but as a sobering example of the fragility of human relationships and the repercussions of unchecked conflict. The Newlander case serves as a cautionary tale, illustrating that even lives marked by success, reputation, and outward stability are vulnerable to breakdowns in communication, trust, and emotional regulation. It highlights the importance of addressing conflict proactively, seeking help when personal tensions escalate, and understanding the profound impact that domestic issues can have on all family members. In conclusion, the Newlander story is remembered for its tragic outcome, the meticulous investigation, and the courtroom drama that followed. It is a story of human complexity, where ambition, personality, and circumstance collided in ways that no one could have foreseen. It reminds viewers that the consequences of unresolved conflict are far-reaching, often touching lives beyond those immediately involved. Through careful examination of the evidence, thoughtful reporting, and measured legal analysis, the case stands as a stark, enduring example of the human costs of domestic discord and the importance of accountability in the face of tragedy.